Welcome, everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast, the podcast where we talk about whether your favorite movies, franchises, directors are overrated or underrated. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. DeAngelis. And today, we've got a special episode. It's the end of the year. We're doing our end of the year movie roundup. We're going to be talking about our top 5 favorite movies of the year.
Yeah, pretty good year for movies, I would say, top to bottom, and really unique year for movies considering there was the WGA strikes earlier in the summer, and then we got the Screen Actors Guild striking after that. The SAG strike is absolutely going to affect the 2024 slate more than anything, but I would say, generally speaking, 2023 was a pretty good year for movies.
Yeah, it was great. It was the year of Barbenheimer, which I think was a big movement that got people into theaters to see things that are not superhero movies. It definitely gave us like some blockbusters that shifted away from the MCU and stuff, which has been cool. It's also been a bad year for superhero movies.
Yeah, year of non-traditional box office hits. The films that are high up in the box office this year are not what you would normally see in those positions.
Yeah, I think I saw most of like the movies that were expected to do well, and I certainly had a lot of love for a few of the ones that did. So I'm excited to be talking about this.
Which is, I mean, it's interesting because both of us are superhero, like movie nerd type people.
Yeah, you didn't catch many this year, right?
I don't have a single superhero film on my top 5.
Oh, me neither. I saw all of them.
Yeah, not a single comic book movie.
Yeah.
So I guess like spoilers for our lists here. No, The Flash. I guess Guardians 3 is probably the best one that came out this year. You don't have Guardians 3 on your list?
No, it didn't crack my top 10 by the end of it.
Blue Beetle. We're recording this like the week before Aquaman 2 comes out. I'm guessing it's not gonna exactly blow up the box office too much. Though, in fairness, Aquaman 1 made $1 billion, so that would be a hilarious FU to James Gunn and the new DC people if Aquaman 2 made $1 billion again.
It would be crazy.
What's up, man? What's happening?
I think if Aquaman 2 makes $1 billion and I go see it and I like it, I will make amendments to this podcast before we release it. I will kick out one of my top 5 movies if Aquaman 2 is more deserving of this.
Yeah, we'll have a little addendum. So I made a top 5 list. You made a top 5 list.
Yep.
So how do you want to do this?
Let's go. We'll count down. We'll each count down. So you go number 5, and I'll do my number 5. And if I hear you say that you have a movie that I have even like higher on my list, then we'll talk about it when we get to it. If you have something at number 5 that I think is the third best movie of the year, we'll talk about it in more detail when we get to that number 3 spot.
Yeah, I should preface this by saying that you watched a lot more movies than I did this year. You had significantly more stuff to work with. Shout out to Letterboxd. We don't really talk about Letterboxd too heavily in this podcast, but if you're somebody that watches a lot of movies, I really can't recommend Letterboxd enough as an app.
Definitely a great way to track the movies that you've been seeing throughout any given period of time. And it lets you see everything your friends are watching. It just makes me feel closer to my friends, you know?
Yeah, it's something that I didn't really start doing too much of until we started this podcast. So I could actually log what I was watching, what were the ratings that I gave for those movies. For anybody interested, we do have a Letterboxd bot built into our Discord server. Our Discord server is not super active right now, but as the podcast grows, I'll anticipate that server will grow as well. You're able to get into our Discord server, and then you can link your Letterboxd account to the bot that we have in there. And then we have a feed that is just film reviews of any time somebody in our community logs a film on their Letterboxd, it'll show up on that feed. And then you're also able to use like search commands. You're able to use like a randomizer command. They'll just give you a random movie if you're just trying to like spitball and watch something.
Yeah, we're going to have to use that at some point just to get a random movie to watch and maybe do for the pod.
Yeah, just for the memes. But yeah, shout out to Letterboxd, not sponsored.
No.
Maybe sponsored in the future, we'll see.
I don't know what their marketing budget is. But yeah, it's great because on that Discord, every time Dylan and I watch a movie together, which we do like twice a week, we both review the movie and I'm always like 4 stars and Dylan's like 2.5 stars.
Yeah, I'm a little more critical with my scoring than you are.
He's stingier with his stars, that's for sure. According to Letterboxd, I saw 44 movies that came out in 2023. Here's my top 5. Actually, Dylan, why don't you go first? Do you have any honorable mentions, stuff that didn't quite make it into the top 5?
No, I did not. I didn't put any honorable mentions.
Okay.
I'm actually pretty happy with my top 5. My top 5, the lowest critical rating on Rotten Tomatoes of any of my films is 93%.
Oh, that's good.
And the lowest audience score of any of my films is 88%.
Yeah.
So these are all 5 films that were critically successful with audiences, and for the most part, successful at the box office as well. 5 really strong movies that I'm excited to talk about here.
Nice. In that case, I'll just rattle off my 2 honorable mentions because these are movies that I loved that just didn't make it into the top 5. So my 7th top movie of the year is a film called Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which is an adaptation of an old young adult novel about a young girl who's coming of age. She moves to a new town, has to go to a new school and make friends, and she doesn't really know what a period is, but she wants to get it. And then when she gets, like, it's a whole thing. It's a very simple movie. There's no, like, high concept things going on. It's just about what it's like to be, like, a 12-year-old girl in America.
Yes, very relatable.
Look, man, I understand the struggle more now of what it's like to be a young girl growing up in this country. I found it very moving. They talked about religion a lot and like what it's like to lose your faith as a 12-year-old. Rachel McAdams is in it and she's great. So just a really strong film all around that did basically everything right. And then the movie that just squeaked out of my top 5 in the last couple weeks was John Wick 4, which I think is an awesome movie. I gave it 5 stars. It's badass as hell. Maybe my favorite of the John Wick films and kind of a perfect like dance choreography action film. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, and John Wick 4 is on my list, so
Okay.
we'll talk about
it more
later in the podcast.
Then what do you have at number 5, Dylan?
My number 5 is Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, which I'm assuming will be retitled to Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning because the second one is no longer called Dead Reckoning Part 2. I don't think we know the name of the second one yet.
Not yet.
It is the 6th film in the Mission Impossible franchise. It is also directed by Chris McQuarrie, who's done a bunch of what he had done the last like 2 or 3 before then. He'd done the last 2 before then. He did Rogue Nation and he did Fallout, which are both incredible films. It's got like an insane Rotten Tomatoes. It's like 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is super high. The film, interestingly enough, it kind of got caught up in the Barbenheimer madness a little bit. I believe this was the movie. I might be getting this backwards. Between Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer, one of them was taking up like all of the IMAX screens at one point during the summer, and the other one couldn't get in.
Yeah, this one was not able to get in because of Oppenheimer. So
the sequence in this film is Tom Cruise jumping his motorcycle off a cliff. He did it in real life. He did it, I think, like 4 or 5 times because he's a crazy person. They're like, hey, Tom, it's fine. We got the shot. You don't need to jump. Why do you need to destroy more motorcycles? This is part 1 of a 2-part story that they're doing, and it almost seems like they're trying to wrap up the series. However, they won't wrap up the series until Tom Cruise actually dies in one of these stunts.
No, this is a cash cow, and it's something that I think he just loves doing. I think he loves being Ethan Hunt, the guy, the coolest guy.
Yeah, he's perfect at this character. They bring back all of the main cast of the franchise, newcomers. Haley Atwell plays this like charismatic, like other like thief character that is really fun foil to Ethan Hunt. I thought their banter back and forth was really well done. Pom Klementieff is in this. She's really good as well. The main villain, I think, is the only like weak spot of the film. He's played by Issei Morales, and he's meant to be this kind of like ultimate baddie who has been pulling the strings a little bit behind the scenes of like all of Ethan Hunt's life.
Yeah. They flash back a couple times to this new villain killing Ethan Hunt's love interest before he became a spy. It's a little confusing. They showed flashbacks that made me think I missed something from the previous movies.
No, this is all new stuff for just this movie.
All new material that they don't explain really. They just kind of show you that this guy has been torturing Ethan Hunt since before we've even known Ethan Hunt. So it was an interesting choice.
Just like any Mission Impossible movie, some really great action sequences in this movie. There's one at the beginning in a desert with Rebecca Ferguson. It's great. There's another one that takes place in an airport terminal, which is a little like cat and mouse chase. Tom Cruise is trying to like hide from these guys. There's an entire sequence where him and Haley Atwell are handcuffed to each other.
Yeah.
And they have to escape in a very tiny car.
Right. That's one of my favorite car chase scenes, I think, in all movies that I've seen. I'm not a huge car chase guy, but that one's just like so funny that it becomes just really engaging to watch. Because they're handcuffed, Haley Atwell is forced to be the one in the driver's seat until the car flips upside down, going down a bunch of stairs, and then they accidentally switch seats. It's crazy. But yeah, that's definitely a sequence that stood out to me.
And then the final sequence of the film takes place on a train. Ethan, he's not able to catch the train when he's supposed to catch the train, and that results in him ramping his bike off of a mountainside so he could parachute down and land on the train. It's really well done, fun movie. I think in the pantheon that is the Mission Impossible franchise, I think it's one of the weaker entries, honestly, but it's a Mission Impossible film by Chris McQuarrie, and it's really good.
Yeah.
And there was times when I thought that this movie was going to slip out of my top 5. I think on rewatch, it's possible I'll like it more.
Okay, yeah.
But because this movie came out in July, I haven't seen it since then.
Yeah, me neither. It's fairly long, so it's kind of a commitment.
It is
watch.
long. It's like 2.5 hours, something like that. And you know I don't like long movies, but
yeah,
I'll make an exception for cool like action movies like this.
Yeah, I think the one like weakness is that it does suffer from like part 1-itis. Like you kind of know you commit 2.5 hours and you get half a story, although I do feel like they cover a lot of ground.
They wrapped it up fairly well at the end of this movie. I think once they take the part 1 off of it, I think you can look at this movie in a vacuum, because the villain in Rogue Nation and Fallout are the same guy. So you can have villains that like are in multiple movies in this franchise. Not everything exists in a vacuum. Okay, so what's your number 5?
My number 5, I have the teen sex comedy Bottoms. Now, we watched this together.
Yes, we did.
I had already seen this a couple times in theaters. I know you didn't like this quite as much as I did, but I just thought this was like the funniest, raunchy teen comedy since Superbad, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this movie is basically Superbad or American Pie, but for queer girls. Mm-hmm. That's the elevator pitch for the movie.
Yeah, and it's a strong pitch. And there's like the driving force is violence. They start a fight club in their school to get out of trouble for committing violence. They're like, oh, that was actually part of this extracurricular thing that we're starting. We shouldn't get expelled. You should let us start a club for girls to learn how to fight and protect themselves, which is what they do. But what the club ends up becoming is their vehicle for a way to sleep with the woman in their school that they think are very attractive. So it becomes this sort of sex comedy that's mixed with a fight club element. And I just think it's very creative and fun. I think it is that classic teen comedy that we're very familiar with, but updated for like a new generation.
It very much is a Gen Z version of this concept, because if you go back and watch American Pie, like there's just so many bits in that movie that they worked better in the late 90s than they would in 2023.
Oh, I'm sure.
There's no apple pie scenes in this movie.
No.
If for anybody that's watched American Pie, I think it's a solid movie. I'm sure that if I related to these characters in any way,
yeah, I remember.
I would probably enjoy it more. But obviously, it's a formula that works. It's just a formula that we almost always see from the male perspective.
Yeah, when we were watching it, you even said like, "Oh, there's no like loser guy character that I can relate to," and I was like, "Yeah, Dylan, they're loser girl characters. It's the same thing."
I'm like, that's not a thing. All women are queens.
Yeah, that's true. We believe that here at the Over Under podcast.
Also, Marshawn Lynch is in this movie, and there's a football team that plays a very important role in the narrative. And there's no Marshawn Lynch scene playing football. It's a huge missed opportunity.
I think Marshawn Lynch is trying to rebrand as a comedy actor, so he's not just jumping into a football uniform every chance he gets.
So Marshawn Lynch, more than any other football player, he's just vibes. He's just a vibes guy.
He's so funny. He's really good in this. Clear that the cast had a lot of fun on that set, and it shines through in the movie. I love this film. I love watching it with people. It's always reliable if you want to just laugh with your friends. Cool. What do you have at number 4?
My number 4, I'm actually curious if this film is on your list as well. It's like the breakout superstar movie that we did not see coming that we watched together. And it's Sisu.
Good. I don't have that on my
You do not have Sisu on your list. Oh, man. So Sisu is about a Finnish soldier in World War II. It's at the final days of World War II. He's no longer a soldier, but he's just... does this movie take place in Finland? I don't even know where it takes place.
Yeah, I think it's in Finland.
But he's a gold miner or prospector. and he finds like a whole like cache of gold at the beginning of this movie, and basically he's trying to take that gold back to a bank so he can, trade it for money. But on the way there, he runs into a Nazi convoy who is in the process of retreating, and they just give him a hard time, and he goes full fucking John Wick on these Nazis.
Yes.
In the most spectacular way imaginable.
Yes. There's a lot of really cool sequences in this, really over the top, and I think we had to realize very early on that we would have to suspend disbelief in order to enjoy this movie, because this man would not die for any reason.
Yeah, we said at the beginning here that we don't have any superhero movies on our list. This is the closest thing to a superhero movie, even more so than something like John Wick. This Sisu guy, there are several portions, like we'll keep things like relatively spoiler free here. There are moments of this movie where he should be dead. Any human being would be dead in this circumstance, but he keeps pushing through because he is Sisu.
Yeah, he has some of the most spectacular kills I've ever seen in cinema. Some of the craziest stuff. I'm just going to spoil the one that was my favorite because it's halfway through, not even halfway through the movie, but at one point he's underwater trying to get across like a river, and the Nazis are following him by boat, and he's holding his breath, so he just comes up and like grabs them as they're waiting on the surface, and then slits the one guy's throat, and then sucks the air out of his throat so that he can stay underwater for longer. It was crazy.
It's so badass.
It was nuts.
Yeah, it's great. He's also, the main character is largely dialogue free for the vast majority of this movie. He's just silent protagonist, and it's a really cool twist on things a little bit because he's just a vessel for just pain and violence, and he's fighting Nazis. What were the movies that we said that this is a combination of John Wick
and Inglourious Bastards.
And Glorious Bastards, and there's something else. Oh, I said Mad Max Fury Road. There's like a bunch of women like hostages that are being held by the Nazis.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of that like car chase type of vibe from Fury Road, where like this convoy is chasing him, and then that convoy just has a bunch of women hostages on it, and then eventually, spoilers again, but they're gonna get their badass Furiosa moments too.
It's awesome, and more people should see this movie. I think it kind of went under the radar this year. This film debuted at TIFF a year and a half ago, and then it finally made it to America in April of this year. It was in theaters briefly. It was budget of $6 million, only made $14 million at the box office. I could absolutely see this as a movie that gets like a whole new fan base watching it on VOD and on like Amazon Prime or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of built for that. It's like a perfect, solid action movie.
And also, it is 90 minutes on the dot. The movie does not feel long. It feels perfectly paced. You're like on the edge of your seat the entire time because you're like, what the hell is this guy going to do next? It's great. I love Sisu.
Yeah, it's fun. At my number 4, I have a movie that just came out recently. It's called May December. It stars Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore. Julianne Moore plays this woman who 20 years ago had an affair with a 12 or 13-year-old boy. That character that Julianne Moore plays went to jail, had that boy's baby in jail, and then when she got out of jail, her and the boy got married as soon as he was of age. So it's this story about, how childhood sexual trauma is traumatizing, and that's a pretty heavy subject. Natalie Portman plays an actress who is going to be portraying this woman in an upcoming film, so she goes to live with that family so that she can study for the role. And so you see these two women kind of mirror each other, and you find that Natalie Portman as this actress is just as like manipulative and hungry for the things that she wants and kind of willing to hurt people just in the name of like art and preparing for a role. And it's very interesting. It's a fascinating character study. And yeah, have you heard anything about this movie?
No, I knew this is in theaters right now, isn't it?
No, it was direct to Netflix.
Oh, it's a Netflix film. Okay. Yeah, it sounds interesting. So a movie about a movie adaptation of a person.
Yeah.
And she's playing the actress that plays that person. Pretty meta.
It is a little bit meta, especially towards the end. One thing that's causing a little bit of a debate right now is whether this movie should be considered a comedy. It's currently, I think, nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Comedy.
Yeah, the Comedy Award at the Golden Globes it's a mess every year.
Yeah, but I would say this is It's a funny movie, even though it tackles.
Yeah, you
dark
describing the
subject
plot
matter.
of this movie in no way makes it sound like a comedy.
It's pretty funny. Like, there's just a lot of really jarring, like, cuts. There's funny music cues. And then ultimately, it's all these people who are performing these, like, mental gymnastics to justify the way that they are. There's, like, a lot of mental and emotional incongruence, which I think is what makes comedy. So just seeing the way these people justify their actions and how horrific some of those actions are, you like have to laugh. So it's definitely funny, but it's also very sad.
Is this supposed to be like an Oscars bait movie or anything like that? You think?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's a little too camp for that. Like, it's not like they're not trying to be dramatic. They're being like melodramatic. They're not trying to be like, this is like a real horror that happens, even though it is. They're not trying to make you feel sympathy for the pedophile that Julianne Moore plays. It's just a really interesting, like, introspection on these characters. What do you have at number 3?
Number 3, I have John Wick Chapter 4.
Oh, good choice.
I saw this movie back in March. This movie will forever stay with me because this is the movie. For some reason, I left this movie with a giant knot in my neck afterwards. That resulted in some sort of pinched nerve injury that has lingered with me for the last like 8 months.
That's terrible.
Do not get old. Pro tip for anybody listening at home. Getting old, do not recommend. The movie itself, though, I enjoyed. And you think that like I would have like bad memories of this movie looking back on that? Because like neck and back stuff is like, it's so bad when you get older. It's doing pretty good right now, despite the cold weather.
Glad your injury's healing.
John Wick Chapter 4, you would think that at a certain point this franchise would get stale because it's just the gunfights, but I think Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves, they do such a good job at constantly reinventing things and showing you things that you hadn't seen before in the franchise. This one is the longest in the franchise. It is almost 3 hours long. It's a very long movie for this genre. And I do think this movie is probably too long. They could probably cut down some of this stuff. But once again, like in Mission Impossible, there are just some like really memorable sequences. There's one where he's fighting. I'm not sure who the actor is, the guy that's in the fat suit.
Yeah.
He's like fighting the penguin basically. And there's just like a dance sequence going on around them. Like they're in the middle of a club and everyone won't stop dancing while they're fighting. There's an incredible like video game scene kind of where it's just a top down camera shot of Keanu Reeves like walking through rooms with this flame gun that's shooting flaming pellets at dudes, and it looks like a video game sequence, and it's one long unbroken shot.
Yeah, that part's amazing. It's like you're looking top down at like a clue board or something, so you see every room as these bounty hunters are trying to find John Wick. He's kind of coming up behind them and shooting them, and the way the fire is on screen, it looks like a painting almost. It's beautiful violence. That's what these movies are known for.
One of the antagonists is played by Donnie Yen, who is also like he's super charismatic in this movie. The contrast between him and John is really cool because he's not just another assassin villain. He's like a buddy of John's. But he kind of gets like contracted into having to fight John. This movie ends in a way that they could leave off the franchise with this movie if they wanted to. I believe they're working on a John Wick 5.
Yeah.
So this will not be the end of the franchise. It made too much money. It made almost $500 million at the box office this year.
Yeah, that's a ton of money for a John Wick movie. I'm happy for them.
Considering where this franchise started, I'm curious, how would you rank the 4 John Wick movies?
I'd probably go 4, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I'd be similar. I'd be 1, 4, 2, 3.
Yeah, I love that first John Wick. I think it's like a super tight movie. I think the low budget feel kind of helps it stand out, but this one just ramps everything up. I think what this movie is kind of like a greatest hits collection from the first 3 films. So like one of the best sequences in the first one is the fight at the club. So in this one, they send John Wick to another club. In the third one of the best sequences is the fight at the Continental. So in this one, they sent him to the Continental Japan. So you just see like these same things. In the second one, you see John Wick running through the streets of New York as all these bounty hunters are trying to kill him. In this one, they do that, but they set it in Paris. So they're taking all these greatest moments from the first 3 movies, giving them a new location in another country.
And they're bigger. That's the other thing.
And
like
they're bigger.
This is the big budget version of those scenes.
Yes.
And it's great. Keanu Reeves is perfect for this role. I think if you're to look at any action movie franchise, like this is how you do it, where you start start with your first movie is a really cool concept, a very tight script, basic concept. It's just a revenge movie, and it works. It works really well, and it creates this character, it creates this persona that you can just kind of like mold into the rest of that universe. And you take a few steps back and like nothing in this world makes sense. This is just like a video game universe. But when you're in it, you're like, this is badass. Who cares? That's all I want. And this movie got like super high like critical scores also. It's got 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. So yeah, I don't think this franchise is going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, it had a TV spinoff this year, and it's got another spinoff coming out next year. And like you said, John Wick 5 might be on its way. So we'll see.
Yeah. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 is another film that I just saw recently. It's called Godzilla Minus One.
Godzilla Minus One is higher on my list.
Okay, cool. Then we'll talk about it when we get there. Where is it on? Or tell me what your number 2 is.
It's my number 2, so we can talk about it.
Talk about it right now.
Talk about it right now. Godzilla Minus One. We saw it separately in the theaters.
That's right. That's right.
This film is released by Toho Studios, a Japanese film studio. They released it for the 70th anniversary of Godzilla. There are just so many Godzilla. Do you know how many Godzilla movies have ever been made?
No, I don't.
The vast majority have been made in Japan, including I think there's been 6 or 7 ones that were made in America. This movie is number 37.
37.
And then the one that comes out next year with Godzilla and Kong, that'll be 38.
Right.
So in 7 years, like they're averaging like a Godzilla movie every 2 years, basically. It's just insane. This is absolutely massive movie franchise that kind of goes like under the radar in the West because most of them are Japanese productions. And that a lot of those like older Godzilla films are kind of memes a little bit. If you just look at quick like clips of them, a lot of them are Godzilla is clearly a man in a suit.
Yeah.
In a miniature town, it doesn't look nearly as good. That is not what Godzilla Minus One is, though.
This movie looks spectacular. I think when we were watching the trailer, you said this might be like the best CGI that's ever been done for a creature. And I think that's pretty apt. There's a lot of sequences that are challenging that these people had to make. The guy who directed it was also the head of the VFX. So like he was hands-on with how this Godzilla would look and feel. And they were shooting a lot of stuff like in the water, up against boats, all these things that make animation, which is already so hard, just even harder.
Yeah, a lot of this movie takes place in the water. Water in general is complicated to animate because it's so unpredictable. One of the things I really liked about the movie is that they really harp on the fact that Godzilla is a water monster, that yes, he will come on land and like attack buildings and shit, but he comes from the sea. The sea is where he calls home. It's one of the things that I kind of like about when there's a sequence where he's destroying a city and he looks so slow. Obviously, it makes him seem more menacing, but it's clear that like he's out of his element when he's not in the water. So a lot of like really cool details with that. But the main thing that people are going to come out of Godzilla Minus One thinking is like, holy shit, does this movie do a good job at the balance between the monster sequences and the human element? And it's basically any Godzilla movie or any like monster movie in general, it's going to have the main issue of how do you make the audience care about the human characters? Because in the back of your head, you're thinking, I just want to see Godzilla. Put Godzilla on screen. This movie's called Godzilla. I want to see Godzilla stuff. However, the sequences in this movie that don't have Godzilla are just as compelling, if not more. I think it's a really incredible story that they built around this.
Yeah, I was shocked by how like moved I was just watching these people in just like immediate post-World War II Japan, kind of suffering from the loss of that war. The main character is a former kamikaze pilot. He was ordered to go down with the ship, basically, or go down with the plane, and kamikaze himself at the end of the war to preserve his honor in the face of the defeat. He did not do that, and because of that, he feels this immense guilt, and he doesn't know if he deserves to live after so many people he knows have died. And that's what he struggles with throughout the film. So this movie's kind of about one man and kind of one country finding its will to fight again, fight for life instead of fighting for war and destruction.
Yeah, it's a movie about the aftermath of war and when does a war actually end. This is a man that he still feels like his war is still happening and he desperately wants to move on from it, but he can't. Some other like great elements of the film, like this woman that shows up and hands him a baby.
Yeah.
And this woman and the baby, they just end up like moving into his like half destroyed house because his city got like sacked during during the war, so it's just all like rubble. Clearly, like this man and this woman have feelings for each other, but he can't like allow himself to be happy. In the middle of all of this is Godzilla.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a drama that's just as compelling as the monster stuff. If there was no Godzilla in this movie,
Yeah, it'd still be
would
pretty good.
Be a good movie.
It'd be very anime.
Yeah,
but
it would not be something I think that I would know to watch if there was no Godzilla, but I was shocked at just how emotional I got and how invested in these characters I got. I also think it's very provocative to like make your main character an ex-kamikaze pilot. Like that's crazy. And then to show that over here too, like that's a tough thing to do, to make us feel sympathy for him, but they did it. It was such a good movie.
Yeah, and I really liked that a lot of the movie depicts the Japanese people as being critical of the Japanese government post World War II. I think that a lot of American movies depict foreign civilians as being like loyal to their countries, and this is a film that is constantly showing you people that are questioning that authority, starting from the very beginning of the film with our main character saying like, why do I have to kamikaze myself? The idea of a kamikaze pilot in general seems stupid,
Right?
Because you're losing a man and you're losing a plane.
Right. Yeah, I did not do any research about the war strategy of kamikaze pilots after this movie, but part of me imagines it's like a psychological thing. Japan's trying to tell its enemies that our fighters will kill themselves in the name of our country. And I do love what you're saying, that Godzilla subverts that. It's like, no, that's wrong. It's morally wrong. It is stupid. And for a country to be successful, it needs to love its people and want them to live.
Yeah, and the film really does hit the perfect balance. It has the exact correct amount of human scenes and Godzilla scenes. And by the time you get to the end of the movie, it's just a straight action movie. It's great. We won't spoil like any like the main plot points of the film. Absolutely go see this. At the time we're recording this, I believe it's still in theaters. It had gotten a wider release.
Yeah.
Because it was getting such good word of mouth. I wouldn't be surprised if this movie got some Oscars buzz too. I especially like in the visual effects, realm.
I hope it does. I'm not sure. That third act, you know what it reminded? It reminded me of like Dunkirk, but if Dunkirk had a Godzilla.
Had Godzilla, yeah.
Which is like a great concept.
Like, sign me up.
Yeah. Okay, so at my number 2, I have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Did we see this movie together?
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
My memory
It was so long ago. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is the sequel to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It follows Miles Morales as he is coming into his own as Spider-Man. There was a lot of good Spider-Man media this year. Spider-Man 2 came out for the PS5. But this movie feels incredibly special to me. It's always fun just watching a bunch of Spider-Men get together and hang out. And they do that again. The same thing from the first movie, where these different Spider-Men from different universes meet and compare their lives, and you get to see how they go about saving people, and there's these spectacular action sequences. But this movie also does something different, which is it's a meta commentary about the story of Spider-Man and storytelling in general. So Spider-Man is a character that's kind of like marked by the tragedies in his life. I guess antagonistic forces of this film posit that those tragedies are necessary for a Spider-Man to be Spider-Man. So Spider-Men have to suffer according to some of the antagonizing forces in this movie. Miles Morales says that that's bullshit. He fights back against a whole bunch of other Spider-Men, and he says, I'm gonna do my own thing. And that's kind of like the theme of the movie, is breaking free of the mold that's been set for you. What were your thoughts on the film?
It's good. I don't think I liked it as much as I liked the first one. What's interesting is that 2023 kind of became the year that we started seeing a little bit of multiverse fatigue in these big media properties, where people seem to be getting a little bit tired of like, we need a million bajillion characters in these movies. I do think that this film in particular does a good job at hitting that balance between like understanding who your main character is and what their journey is supposed to be, and then just having like the multiverse stuff be the backdrop to all of that, having it all be secondary and have it be like played for jokes and be played for like Easter eggs. On a technical level, this movie is absurd with the amount of artistic styles and animation styles that they're like constantly going between. There's a character in it, what's it called, the Spot?
Yes.
All the stuff with him is very interesting because he's like jumping between like different worlds. There's like a million Spider-Men in this movie.
Yeah,
There's so many Spider-Man. I'm curious what your thoughts are on like the Spider-Verse in general. Like, how important do you think it is to the Spider-Man character? Do you think they've kind of like gone a little far with this as like the main thing? Because the last live action Spider-Man movie that we got was also like a Spider-Verse movie. So do you think they've kind of pushed it a little bit too far with having these Spider-Man films that have other Spider-Man characters in them? Because I know it's a big thing in the comics too. I mean, how many Spider people are there in the comics? When you compare it to like literally any other superhero. I mean, is there a superhero that has more versions of them than Spider-Man?
I mean, there's no superhero that has more versions and they also all meet and hang out constantly. There's like a million versions of Batman for sure, but they don't always team up every 2 years. Yeah, I would agree that people are kind of getting sick of this concept. One thing to keep in mind is that in the comics, you know, the Spider-Verse event from the comics happened in like 2015 or something. It's a fairly recent invention. That storyline's also not good in the comics. What pushed it to the forefront is just that first Spider-Verse movie and how good it is. After that, kind of everyone in Hollywood wanted a piece of that, and that's why we're getting such multiverse fatigue now. But I think that Across the Spider-Verse is something that, you know, it was able to follow in the footsteps of its predecessor and then ramp things up another level and then also subvert expectations too. So in this movie, Miles is like fighting the society of spider people, which is probably not what you would expect going into it. He's almost like rejecting the idea of multiverse too. He's like, okay, I don't want to be another version of these people. I want to be my own man. And he has to go through his trials and tribulations to do that. So
now, do you think that they're going to subvert that even more and have the resolution be, no, wait, you actually need to experience this tragedy in order to become the version of Spider-Man you need to become? Or do you think it's just going to be Miles is right the entire time?
I think that Miles is going to be able to subvert the canon event that is required for becoming Spider-Man. I think he's going to prove that you can be a good person and be a good Spider-Man without having to suffer a tragic loss. That's my hope for the way this franchise turns out. And then as for whether or not there's just too much multiverse stuff now, I think there is. I think there's no way that this particular franchise can go back to not being that. I don't think they're going to make an Across the Spider-Verse 3 or, you know, a movie in this universe that doesn't have a bunch of spider people hanging out, which is kind of unfortunate that we probably won't see like a solo Miles Morales story coming out of this animated universe. It's still very good, and I'm really looking forward to part 3.
This is a movie that got a little bit of pushback after a lot of the animators spoke out as like the working conditions for this movie were absurd and there's a lot of crunch, and they were redoing sequences for this movie like all the way up until release, which seems insane. And it's probably the main reason why they had to split this into 2 movies, because there's so much that goes into this animation style that it's like a little bit unethical to like push animators to do this level of stuff.
Yeah, we're going to have to see. I'm hoping that in the future, you know, the production team will have learned their lessons from that experience and make better working conditions for their workers. This movie also had a budget, I think, of only $100 million, which is a lot of money, but compared to the budgets for these other superhero movies, it's not that much at all. And this movie drew in a lot of money. I feel like they should have doubled that budget, honestly, and paid their workers a lot more money.
Yeah, we didn't talk about it when we talked about Godzilla Minus One, but that movie has a reported budget of $15 million, which Japanese studios are famous for overworking and underpaying the technical aspects of their departments. Realistically, the budget for that movie, 1, it probably is a lot higher than that, and 2, it should be even way more higher than like how technically proficient that film was. All right, so that was your number 2, right?
That's right. What do you have at number 1?
I think we have the same number 1.
I think we do too. Should we count down and say it?
3, 2, 1. Oppenheimer.
Let's go.
Oppenheimer, baby.
I think that's pretty fitting. I think the first episode we released for this was about Nolan, right?
He's such a talented director, and we talked about it in our Nolan podcast that he's probably the most talented and proficient director we have right now that hasn't gotten the award success that he should have gotten. And I think Oppenheimer is going to be the film that breaks through for him. I'm curious, do you think that this is his best movie? at this point.
Yeah, I think it's his best movie by like a wide margin. I think he makes a lot of like sci-fi movies that don't say that much or that are very blunt in their themes. I think this movie has a lot of nuance. I think the fact that it's just rooted in history kind of limits the scope of like how big Nolan can go, and yet he pushes past those limitations anyway. I think this movie's awesome. It's like long as hell, but every minute of it is exciting. My eyes were glued to the screen, even though a lot of times it's just old white scientists talking to each other. Somehow he makes everything engaging in this film.
And it's cool because you can see a lot of elements of his other movies bleed into this one, as if this is the film where he put it all together. He took the nonlinear storytelling that he incorporates in a ton of his movies.
Yes.
And then he took like the science fiction like mumbo jumbo from like Interstellar and like Inception, and then he also takes like the wartime like PTSD elements of Dunkirk, like the over the top like bombastic scores from like Interstellar and from like Dark Knight. Like he takes all that and he puts it into one movie. It's near perfect. It's very well done considering the subject matter at hand. The movie is a biopic about the guy who led the Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb. And speaking of Godzilla -1,
Yeah.
which also takes place in with World War II Japan, these films are two sides of the same coin a little bit here.
Yeah, I remember one criticism that Oppenheimer got from a lot of people is like, I wish I saw the effects this had on Japan, right? Like, we see him build the bomb and it's this great triumph, but shouldn't we see like the victims of this destruction?
And I think it makes it a little more haunting that we don't see the other side of things.
Yeah.
That we don't even see like the bombings happening. We don't even have like a television shot of like, we bombed Japan.
Yeah.
Like, we don't get any of that.
You get a radio, you get to hear it on the radio news instead. It's an interesting choice, but I think it's the right one. It's not about the war, really. It's just about the man behind this. And if you want to see the effects, I mean, you don't want to see that first.
Yeah, I mean,
all.
it is a lot like Godzilla -1, where the movie is as much about the effects of war as it is the war itself. What happens to people afterwards, and there's like the incredible line at the very end of the movie when he's talking to Albert Einstein, and he says like, we thought we were going to create a chain reaction to destroy the world. I think that's exactly what we did. And it's like it's such a needle drop moment.
It's haunting, really. What a good movie.
Cillian Murphy is so fucking good in this movie.
Let's hope he gets that Oscar.
This is not his first Nolan film. He's been in a bunch of Nolan films before this, but this is his first time being like the main lead.
Yeah.
And he took that shit and ran with it.
I think he said, he got a call from Nolan and was like, hey, can you do this in 6 months? And he said yes immediately.
He's like, I can do it right now. Sign me up.
It's a long movie. It almost feels like 2 to 3 movies slammed together. So you see like the rise of him as a scientist, and during that rise they use a lot of superhero tropes. Remember when he suits up and they're like, Oppenheimer, we need you, and he's like, okay, and he gets his pipe and he like goes and gets his hat, and it's like Iron Man putting his suit on. It's so funny. But it's the rise of that, and then it's the building of the bomb itself could be its own movie, and then it's a courtroom drama for like the last 40 minutes.
Which I think is maybe the weakest part of the movie, is that there's so much of the movie that happens after they drop the bomb, and then we just have these like long sequences of just like talking in rooms. And
I thought it worked.
And because Nolan does so much nonlinear storytelling, you kind of would expect him to be bouncing around and maybe like integrating those elements more throughout the film, as opposed to like most of it being at the very end. Because like Robert Downey Jr. kind of becomes like the villain of the movie.
But it serves as like a twist. So when you find out that Robert Downey Jr. is the villain of the movie, it's unexpected. I think if you go back and watch the movie, you'll see that there is a lot of setup happening for that courtroom sequence that's happening throughout the entire film. And then with that courtroom sequence, you're meant to kind of review the rest of all the events through this new lens. And I think it works beautifully.
It speaks to the idea of, was this the right thing to do on his part? He was clearly somebody who was more like left-leaning in his political views when he was younger. I mean, he runs into Florence Pugh's character, who was like part of the communist club, right?
Yeah.
This is like pre-Red Scare, but obviously like communist was not a positive term. You do not want that identifier on you. And then the idea of, the Russians had a spy in the Manhattan Project. The Russians are developing their own bomb. Are they going to make a hydrogen bomb? All of the stuff that happens post World War II. It's very interesting because it's like, is Oppenheimer a good guy? Was he a good person? Would it have been better for him not to do the things that he did? Yeah, probably. But then what does that mean? Does that mean that the Germans would have made a bomb first?
Yeah, it's
the whole movie is just like morally, it's just moral gray areas everywhere, and you feel like there's no good guys and bad guys in the film. Like there's just people, and you're just like watching the story play out.
Yeah, it's incredible. It sort of makes him this mythological type of character, and then humanizes him as it's doing that. It's. I don't know how Nolan did this.
Yeah, which is interesting because I feel like Oppenheimer is not a person that is like too well known in the like American consciousness, especially with how important of a figure he was. Like Albert Einstein's in this movie, and Albert Einstein's infinitely more famous than Oppenheimer in hindsight. But yeah, you would think that the guy that ostensibly invented the atomic bomb, and there's only been 2 atomic bombs dropped on other people in all of human history, and this is the guy that made both of them. You would think that like he would be this giant figure, like on the levels of like other humans that were like first to do these incredible feats of science. Like he would be on the level of like Neil Armstrong or something like that.
Yeah.
But he's not, which is interesting. And I understand that like his name kind of got like dragged through the mud a little bit, like after all of this happened. The movie is truly a feat to take what is a complex subject and a movie that doesn't have a lot of like big events outside of the one big event, which we don't see on the screen.
Right.
It's a movie that is completely built around the characters, and holy shit, the cast in this movie. It's just, the movie's got everybody. The movie's got a lot of dudes that you have seen in other movies that you don't even realize are in this movie because they're just like a background character in a suit. You don't even realize that's them.
It's incredible. Like, I think the closest thing I can compare it to in terms of culture is just the musical Hamilton. So they're both about like a guy who's a well-known historic figure, but no one actually knows anything about their lives. And then suddenly they become this like big cultural event where people are flocking to see and learn about them.
I know it's a meme at this point, but how much of this movie's success could be tied to the Barbenheimer contrast?
I think like maybe a good amount of its box office came from that, but obviously its like critical reception was unaffected. Like, I don't think that made critics like the movie more. It's just kind of a fun thing. I do think it probably drew in a lot of audience members who wouldn't have seen this otherwise. And it got a couple of my friends to see this movie more than once because they would go and watch Barbenheimer Experience, and then they would come back to watch this again when they had more time. So I do think it helped them get maybe $100 million more than they would have otherwise, maybe $200 million more. But I still think it would have been a huge, huge hit and stuck around in the public consciousness regardless of Barbenheimer.
Yeah, because this movie was released in the middle of the summertime in a year that there was kind of a void for like major action or superhero films, and it just took it and ran with it. It's really catapulted. I mean, if Nolan wasn't before, like now he's Quentin Tarantino. He's a director that if he's making a movie, that movie's going to make $500 million off that guy's name alone, because it's like this dude's operating on a whole different plane of existence than every other director out there right now. And if you just look at the caliber of actors that he's able to get for his projects, and that's why like I always harp on the characters that are in minor roles in this movie, because he's getting people that like are stars in like a television show or like a smaller movie. He's having them have like 2 speaking lines in this film because they're like, I just want to be in the movie. I want to be in a Nolan film.
Yeah. I remember they interviewed Florence Pugh, and she said, Nolan came to me and he was like, this is only a small part. You might not want to do it because it's not really a lead role. And she said that she would love to be in a Nolan film so much that she would like play a barista pouring a cup of coffee if he asked. People want to work with this guy. And he's able to use this clout and goodwill that he's built up over the years to, like you said, pull in those A-list actors or these people who are leading stars in their own projects and just have them in the background. And it pays off huge, like, because every single character, and there's so many, was cast perfectly.
Yeah, it's like an all-star sports team. Oh, the people on the bench are all-stars too. They're like the best player on their team, but now they're all on one team. That's what it feels like watching this movie, where you're looking at like the background scientists and you're like, what is that, Josh Peck?
It's so
Like
funny.
why is Jack Quaid playing the bongos in the background?
It's so good.
So that's our number one film of the year. Incredible movie. We're doing this podcast before the Oscar nominations come out. I would guess that this is going to be in all the major categories. I'm sure Emily Blunt's going to get a nomination for this as well. So it's possible that they could hit, Big Five. It'd be the first Big Five since Silence of the Lambs, if they were able to like do a clean sweep. We talked about it in the Nolan podcast. Nolan has never won Best Director. He's only been nominated once. He was nominated for Dunkirk. He's probably the favorite going into the Oscars here.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, this is my favorite Oppenheimer film. I think if there's any point where he's like deserving of the Best Director award, it's right now.
This truly, this is not a Departed situation where like Scorsese got a bunch of his awards for a film that is not his best movie. Like, this is absolutely deserving in Nolan's case. All right, yeah. So that's our top five of the year. A lot of movies. So we had a good bit of diversity in our lists, despite our number one being the same.
Yeah, I was surprised. I thought, well, I guess I knew once I had John Wick 4 out of my top 5 that maybe that would shuffle things up a little bit.
Did you bump John Wick 4 out knowing that I was going to have it on my list?
No, I don't let the content of this podcast affect my integrity of putting together my top lists. Okay.
I'm still hurt that you've left Sisu out.
Sisu was like my number 10, I think.
I'm going to send an email to the Sisu actor. Like, hey, Jason left you off of this list.
Get his ass.
Come out here with your pickaxe.
Oh, I want to spoil so many kills from that movie, but I won't. That's going to be it for this one, guys. Let us know in the comments. Did we get it right? Tell us your top 5 movies of the year. What are some topics you'd like to see for the future? Make sure to leave a like on this episode and consider supporting the show by checking out our Patreon page. For myself, for Dylan, we will catch you guys next week on the Over Under podcast. See you at the movies.
See you, everybody.